Shabbat Shalom, everyone. So glad to have you with us today as we welcome Rachel Fishman Feddersen, the publisher and CEO of The Forward, here to Beth Am to speak in our Press Freedoms Under Siege series. I was looking through my copy of The Forward, which now comes out as a glossy monthly publication in addition to all of the online offerings. And when I got back from our cruise, I was thumbing through it and reading some of the wonderful articles and came upon a piece about the relationship between Jews and snow that I found intriguing. And I was reminded in that article of a great Chelm story about the shamus in the story of Chelm. The shamus is the guy, sort of like an Ephraim Potts, right? So the person is around making sure the building functions, and in this case, his job was also to notify the rabbi that it was time to get up for prayers, but it had snowed, and the snow was blanketing the ground, and it was so beautiful that the shamus didn't want to disturb the snow. And so he said to his sons, I want you to carry me through the snow to the rabbi's house so that I can knock on the door and wake him and let him know that it's time for prayers. And of course they do that, and they carry him through the snow so that his feet don't touch the ground at all and he doesn't disturb the beautiful blanketed white surface there. And he knocks on the door and wakes the rabbi, and they turn around to return, and he asks his sons to pick him up again. And he notices that, lo and behold, two people, not just one, had come out and disturbed the snow, and it no longer was as beautiful. I don't know what that has to do with anything, but it's a great story, and it's a reminder for me of the eclectic nature of a news organization like The Forward. In the course of one publication, you can read stories about what's happening with women and the Me Too movement, a story about Shlomo Carlebach and a really thoughtful op-ed that quotes his daughter Neshama and reflecting a little bit on the life and legacy of a man who was a very flawed individual but who also offered so much to the artistic Jewish world. An article about the new Museum of the Bible in Washington and maybe its implications for the relationship between church and state in this country. An op-ed about nonviolence Palestinian resistance by the editor of the paper, Jane Eisner. Another op-ed from 1944 by none other than Isaac Bashevis Singer, writing about intermarriage in his day and the effect of intermarriage in that era in the 1940s. And on, a bisexual Nazi who turns out to have also been Jewish. It really runs the gamut and shows just how varied but also how important and relevant a publication like this can be. So a few words about our speaker, who is no stranger to Beth Am Synagogue, and I know her parents, David and Merle, are here shepping nachas today, as is her cousin Jonathan. And though Jeff and her sons Ezra and Levi are still at home in New Jersey, Rachel made the trek down on the train yesterday. Rachel Fishman Feddersen has worked with audiences of many millions as the chief content officer of Patch, with 900 sites across the country, digital GM at mentalfloss.com and theweek.com, thought-leading brands for millennials and global citizens, and editor-in-chief of parenting.com. She's won numerous awards for digital achievement. She was inducted into the Digital Hall of Fame in 2011, and that same year she attended President Obama's White House Summit on Digital Women, which I am told is better than the Trump White House's Summit on Actual Women. She's made regular appearances as an expert on the Today Show, Good Morning America, as well as NPR and PBS, and since her arrival at The Forward in May of 2016, Rachel Feddersen has been leading Jewish news organization, has been leading this Jewish news organization, The Forward, through successful growth during an increasingly complex time for traditional journalism. I'm sure she'll have what to say about that in her remarks. And we're going to change our format a little bit from last time. We're going to have Rachel say a few words first, and then we'll have a conversation, and we'll open up to the audience as well. Welcome to Beth Am, Rachel Fishman Feddersen.
Hi, I am taking it in. I'm really pleased to be here. I am honored to be part of this series on press freedoms under siege. I think the last time I stood up here and spoke was for my bat mitzvah speech in 1983, and that got raves, so I'm hoping that I can live up to the performance I brought then. A lot has changed since then, but a lot has stayed the same. Beth Am is still the gorgeous, solemn sanctuary that I grew up in and that I measure all other synagogues against. Dr. Kaplan is the rabbi that I grew up with and that I measure all rabbis against. And Rabbi Berg is carrying on the wonderful tradition of marrying scholarship with justice in the world, and it's really moving and wonderful to see. This is the place where I came to family services, where I would cruise the buffet afterwards looking for the brownies. Where the Purim Spiel featured our dads as the beauty contestants, where we gossiped, where I felt totally, completely myself and at home. And it's the place where I absorbed so many of the Jewish values that have led me to the job that I have now. Values like justice, and thoughtfulness, and study, and humor, and hamishness, and the strength of community. This is the place where I learned that Judaism is a living, breathing institution, not words in a book or a statement of belief, but a practical guide for living a life of meaning. I'm older. The building is older, although it looks great. I'm a grown-up with a career, but when I am at Beth Am, I know I'm in a place where the things that matter are honored. And that history is part of what makes me me and why I'm in the job that I have today. I am the CEO and publisher of The Forward, formerly the Jewish Daily Forward, still the Jewish Daily Forward, but called The Forward. And I feel that I'm really in exceptional company in this series with David Simon and Ben Jacobs and Robert Blau. And I'm thrilled that there are so many Jewish voices in media. And I'm also really proud to be representing the only media company in the series that specializes in independent Jewish journalism. That's unique, and I think it's important. So I'll tell you a little bit about The Forward. When I tell people I work at The Forward, I get usually one of two responses. Either, my grandfather read The Forward in Yiddish, or among people my age, and I'm not that young anymore, as I've said, not that old, but I'm not that young. Among people my age and younger, I get, and you can see they're like they just can't place it. We're a 120-year-old Jewish media brand, and we're still being rediscovered by readers today. We're relatively small, but we punch above our weight. We've broken some of the biggest Jewish news stories of the century and helped the community through them, from the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire to the Holocaust to the birth of Israel, to the current administration and the vicious resurgence of anti-Semitism across the country. 120 years ago on New York's Lower East Side, Abraham Ab Kahan created a newspaper that was of and for his community. His community was made up of East European Jews who were entering a new world, who urgently needed to learn about this place, to learn about their responsibilities and their privileges, and how to navigate America. They understood that they had to understand America, and that it was also their place to have America adapt to them as they adapted to it. And that's where not just the Forward story, but a lot of our stories start, in the immigrant neighborhoods of the past century. Like this one. The Forward had offices in this neighborhood. The Baltimore Jewish story is the Forward story. The Forward story is our story. Here are a few of the big stories. In 1902, the headline reads, "Bravo, Jewish women! 20,000 of us have taken to the streets to protest the cost increase of kosher meat." In the teens, the forward crusades for better treatment of factory workers. My grandmother worked in a factory. She worked at Gelfand's Mayonnaise. The forward is her story. These stories win the forward more and more readers as Jews pour into America searching for a better life. In 1925, Ab Kahan makes his first trip to Israel, one of 4 trips, and it was not so easy to get there back then. He admires and supports what the Jews are doing in Israel, and he is attacked for it in the leftist Yiddish press, because not all Jews were Zionists, but the Forward continued its support and continues its support, unwavering, for Israel today. In 1925, the Forward circulation is bigger than the New York Times. In 1934, the Forward mobilizes public opinion against the Nazi threat long before anyone else in America saw what was coming. In 1939, the Forward carried the first reports of the mass murders of Jews in Poland. In 1945, the Forward begins helping thousands of families reunite by committing to publishing the names of the survivors in the DP camps. And a few years later, we cover the founding of the State of Israel in banner headlines, in red, in the black and white paper. The Forward story is our American Jewish story. In 1951, Ab Kahan died, but the Forward continues. Elie Wiesel was a staff writer. Isaac Bashevis Singer was a staff writer from 1935 to 91. While working for us, that's when he won the Nobel. So why haven't you heard of us? In 1990, the first English language edition is published. We published exclusively in Yiddish until 1990. It was not great for growing readership. But Yiddish is an essential piece of who the Forward is, and we still publish in Yiddish. We have a Yiddish website. We have a monthly Yiddish paper. If you go to the website, you can click on any word and get its translation into English. And you can watch our videos with subtitles. So if you can't read Hebrew or you can't read Yiddish, you can still hear the Yiddish and see what it means. But in English, it's in English that we can once again reach the majority of American Jews and bring them the stories that matter. Kosher meat is news again, just like in 1902. 10 years ago, we uncovered unfair labor practices at agri-processors, which was then the largest kosher meatpacking company in the US. And Baltimore is still connected to the Forward. In 2014, we covered a Baltimore killer who was being considered to be let out of jail. He was the murderer of Esther Leibovitz, who I think some people here might have known, might have experienced. We covered the impact of that story on the Baltimore community at the Forward. In 2015, the Forward was the first to send a Jewish reporter for a Jewish publication to Iran since the 1979 revolution. And a few weeks after that, Jane Eisner, our editor-in-chief, was the first journalist from a Jewish media organization ever to interview a sitting president, President Obama, in the Oval Office. In 2016, Rachel Schechter became the first female editor of the Yiddish Forwards, and I was hired as publisher. In 2017, we uncovered presidential advisor Sebastian Gorka's fascist ties, and I was promoted to CEO. So from roots in the streets of the Lower East Side, through 2 world wars, the founding of Israel, the cultural upheaval of post-war America, the digital revolution, the Forward has been there. The Forward story is our story. And now the Forward story is my story. How did I get there? Well, after I graduated from college, I did a program called Project Otzma, which was a year-long residency in Israel. The Associated sent me, and I volunteered in low-income communities around the country. And then I came home, and I got a job in media, but in mainstream media. I did not consider going into Jewish media. I didn't even know it was a thing, other than the Jewish Times. I didn't know about it. So I started working in media, and I actually started working at a website. accidentally becoming a digital pioneer, because I've been doing it now for my whole career, my only tenuous connection to the Forward was that I studied Yiddish in my 20s. Just because, it was not a career move. But, it didn't hurt when it came to interviewing at the Forward. That's not why they hired me, but they hired me because the Forward, which has reinvented itself many times, realized it was time to do it again. This is my first job as a professional Jew, and I bring all of my experience in digital media to this new challenge. And what is my challenge? To transform this 120-year-old company to be what we call digital first. And by the way, hasn't turned a profit since 1944, and my job is to get it to be financially sustainable. And it's a privilege. These are big challenges, but it is a privilege to me to be the one who gets to lead the Forward through these challenges. At the Forward, we get paid to inform, to connect, to inspire. We think about the big questions. We dig up stories that matter. We explore new trends in Judaism. We talk to spiritual leaders and entrepreneurs, artists and writers and educators, everyone who engages with their Jewishness. And the breadth of this topic and reach is reflected in our staff. At the offices of the Forward, we have Jews from across the political, cultural, and religious spectrum working together to create great journalism and to celebrate Yiddishkeit. We have people from age 20 to 70 and older. Two of our most senior editors are Orthodox women who wear shadels. Many of us have lived in Israel and have family there now. We are a training ground for young Jewish journalists. We bring young Jewish journalists in every semester and have a dozen or so college students as interns every year. And the talent that we bring in is formidable. Jeffrey Goldberg, editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, started at the Forward. Ben Smith, editor-in-chief of BuzzFeed, one of the biggest media organizations on the planet, started at the Forward. Our writers have been poached by everybody from the New York Times to Refinery 29. And this is the kind of talent that you need, not just want, but that you really need when you're taking on issues that readers feel so deeply, are so passionate about. Israel, anti-Semitism, intermarriage, assimilation, Jared and Ivanka, Jewish power brokers, national and local, charities, the major institutions of our world, celebrating the critical work they do, holding these institutions accountable to the public that they serve. It's complicated. It's not simple. Luckily, this complexity is familiar to us from our tradition. Maybe you're familiar with the saying, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. Or maybe you know the joke about the Jew on the desert island who builds 2 synagogues, so he has one he can go to and one he would never go to. And then there's the Talmud. Think about the Talmud. You have the text in the middle of the page, and it is surrounded by commentary of centuries. All this commentary does not agree with each other. It's not like, yeah, he's right. It picks up the issue in the middle of the page, and it examines it from all sides, and it brings a deeper meaning through the complexity. One text that has particular meaning to us is Shoftim, the one that says, justice, justice shall you pursue. That is the essence of what we do. The Forward is interested in reporting on and showcasing the broad sweep of opinion, trends, and deep thinking in the Jewish world. We are committed to bringing our readers an accurate reflection of the complexity of what is happening across the country and around the globe as it relates to Judaism and to us, the readers. We do it without fear or favor, and we do it time after time, day after day, 24/6, 7 if news breaks on Shabbos. So I want to talk about the voices that we include in the Forward. When it comes to including voices, even ones that can make different groups of readers uncomfortable or angry, we err on the side of inclusion. We are publishers. It's our business to publish. It's our business to show our readers a opinion they might not have even known about. We have seen the damage wrought by cultures that are too quick to censor. We've seen what's happening on college campuses around the country as they clamp down on free speech in the name of freedom. We want Jewish voices in the forward, and we want all Jews to be represented in the forward. And we are so fortunate that we have the digital tools to carry out our mission. We have a place for community contributors to send in their thoughts and their writings. We have digital audience measurements so we can see which stories people linger on and share. We have digital subscriptions, which we just launched, so we can actually pay a little bit more for the reporters to do the important work that they do. And our measurements tell us that it's working. Our readership is growing, and a third of our readers, 1.5 to 2 million a month, a third of them are between 18 and 35. When you think and possibly worry about whether the next generation cares about being Jewish, I can tell you that a lot of them are reading the forward. Now, part of that may be because we're at a moment in time when being Jewish, just being Jewish, is again something that is noticeable, remarkable. A generation that came of age in the time of Obama is being introduced now to what seems to be the perennial truth of anti-Semitism. And by the way, it kicked up last year, right about when I stepped into this job. I didn't know at the time I was taking a high-profile job as a public Jew at the very moment that anti-Semitism was also reemerging. But I took the job just as the presidential race was heating up, and public discourse was becoming superheated, and public insults and abuse from a podium were suddenly acceptable in a way that had not been the case before. I have to run an energetic, hopeful, productive staff through these times. Our reporters started hearing things like, "I don't talk to Jews on the phone," or getting Twitter messages that say things like, "You would look good as a lampshade." Others of us have had our home addresses, where we live with our children, posted to white supremacist message boards. I got home from work one day. Somebody sent me a card. Who sent me this Hallmark card? Open it up. Not a card. Xeroxed sheets, long screeds of how the Jews are going to hell. Took it to the police station to look at the return address because the sender put his name on this envelope. And it turns out he served time in the 90s for arson at a women's health clinic. So I was not raised as an anti-Semitism crusader. It was not an issue that we had to deal with in this way. I was an English major. Now I'm responsible for figuring out how to increase office security in case somebody, God forbid, shows up and wants to kill someone. Fortunately, or not, this is not the first time our community has faced danger. And New York's Jewish Community Relations Council, the JCRC, was hugely helpful to us. We now have a relationship with the NYPD. We have increased security. We have safe rooms with bolts, peepholes. We have panic buttons, and we have security drills so the staff knows what to do. There's nothing special about us. We went into journalism because we love to tell stories and we love our community and we think those stories are important. This is something that doesn't just come with the territory. You don't know when you're getting into it. Oh, you're just going to have to deal with that. But now we do. And we are. We're not going to stop doing this job because of the anti-Semitism. It's frightening, but now it is something that we just have to deal with. Luckily, it's not what we focus on every day. There is a lot of positive to focus on because the future at the Forward is very bright. Once we were fading. Now we're growing. Our print newspaper used to reach 30,000 people. Now our digital audience is in the millions. And our Yiddish publication is thriving digitally. The Yiddish audience is growing. There are thousands of views for a video in Yiddish on how to make matzah brai. So if you go to YouTube and look for the forwards, you can learn too. Passover's in a few months. Hundreds of thousands of people reach the forward through social media. We're multi-platform. We have a podcast that is the essence of what the forward is. It's called Fault Lines, and it takes on a Jewish issue from the left and the right-ish of center with Peter Beinart and Danny Gordis, who don't agree about anything, but are friends. And the thing they do agree on is to talk about tough issues in a respectful way. At the Forward, we think that the danger for the Jewish people is not any particular point of view on a political issue. It's apathy. The danger to the Jewish community comes from people who just don't care about it anymore. And that's what we combat at the Forward every day. Our young readership, those 18 to 35, and remember, there are hundreds and thousands and millions of them reading us every year, they are hungry for discussions of Jewish identity. They are full of thoughts about race and social justice and what it means to be Jewish, and they come to the Forward to explore these ideas and to turn toward their Judaism rather than away from it. Yes, we cover anti-Semitism like nobody else can, and the New York Times did a nice article about that a few months ago. But we also make Jewish life accessible and attainable and real to a wide and growing readership. And we need your help. The media business took a critical blow in 2008. There is no media company that supports itself anymore just from advertising and subscriptions. Lainey, I forgive you. The Forward went from being a business that supported itself in this way to one that is now a 501c3. We became a nonprofit when it became, well, we've always been nonprofit because we were founded by socialists, but we've become a 501c3, which means that, you can deduct your donations. We need those donations. For a long time, we actually covered our operating costs with assets we gained when we were so huge. But that business model is not viable. Just at the time when anti-Semitism is on the rise, when Jews are urgently seeking news that tells their particular Jewish story, when hatred that had gone underground is out and loud and proud, and at a time when institutions aren't filling needs for younger Jews, perhaps in the same way they might have a few generations ago, at a time when we need the Forward, we face this existential challenge. The generations before us worked hard, and we've benefited from that. Now it's our turn to work for the next generation. Our funders are a critical part of our survival. A few of our donors are in the audience, and to you I say, thank you. For the rest of you, if you've never read the Forward, although if you're here, I highly doubt that's the case, but it's possible, if you've never read the Forward, come and read the Forward. Go to forward.com. I think you will be truly surprised by all we have to offer. If you love what we do already, tell a friend. Tell somebody who says, Forward. Tell them who we are. If you believe in what we do, if you understand and believe in the importance of a Jewish paper that deals with Jewish issues through a Jewish lens, please reach out to me. And let's discuss how you can help sustain our mission. If you want us to be there for your children and for their children, support us. Thank you.
Hello?
Well, Rachel, thank you so much, both for not giving your bat mitzvah speech again.
It was really good.
I'm sure it was,
It was
actually.
on Vayigash, which I believe
It
you
was
referred to today.
Vayigash, really? All right, so go ahead.
We can talk about it after. Anybody
Okay.
wants to talk about it, we'll talk after.
That's awesome. I don't remember my bar mitzvah speech at all. I'm fairly certain yeah, okay. But, I mean, if your poise and ability to speak to an audience is any indication of what you might have been like as a child, I'm sure it was terrific, and I'm sure your parents would affirm that statement. It really is such a treat to have you back at Beth Am, and I know it's not your first time back here since your bat mitzvah. You're back here frequently, but to be able to give you a platform to be able to speak about your publication, about the work that you do at the Forward, I was mesmerized by your words, and I really appreciated the way that you tied together both the current circumstances in our country and the mission-oriented work that a publication like The Forward does. I was looking around to see, and I think the gentleman who's a member of the congregation who actually he writes for your Yiddish side is not here today. He's, I don't see, is Zach here? I don't think he's here. But he's Shomer Shabbos. He walks from Charles Village. I don't know if he's in town, but it's quite cold today. But I know that he is very enthusiastic about the work that he does in Yiddish for the publication. It is important, and he's a young guy speaking Yiddish to his young children who are in school with my own kids at Krieger Schechter. So, Rachel, I want to start our conversation with the same question that I asked David Simon and I asked Ben Jacobs. The title of the series is Press Freedoms Under Siege, and I'm wondering if you think it's true. Are they? And if so, how? And how do we respond? And if not, what are your thoughts about the state of journalism in America today?
Well, I think, you can hear me, right? Okay.
Yeah, you just have to hold it
Okay.
close to your mouth there.
Here I am. I think when you have a president who calls real news fake news and is actively working to undermine the credibility of the truth, then regardless of whether he's put in an official order against a media organization, the very idea of journalism founded on telling the truth as best as you possibly can, it's under siege. There are no new laws that preclude us from doing what we do, and there are some dangers that feel more visceral because we happen to have to deal with anti-Semitism in a way that some other papers don't. I mean, there are always cranks who call up the paper and are angry wherever you work, and this has happened everywhere I've worked. But this is different. But that's a different kind of under siege. And truly, it kicked up when civility was thrown out the window in the middle of the presidential campaign, championed by our president. So for us, it's not a legal challenge. It is an emotional and safety challenge to commit to doing work that puts our names in the public eye as Jews, and as Jews who dare tell the true story, which is then labeled as the fake story. So we're under siege in that way at the Forward in particular. And because we're a nonprofit, we are now, I don't make the tax laws, and I saw how thick the regulations were, so who knows how much in there was intentional. But the new laws that make itemizing deductions for charitable giving not worth it unless you give above a certain level means that our funding is under siege through a different kind of tactic. So, we have a lot of challenges to deal with in addition to the president trying to undermine what truth actually is.
Yeah, I mean, of course, synagogues also have to contend now with what is this going to mean
Absolutely.
for charitable giving,
Yeah.
and it's something I think across the nonprofit world we're facing. Some have said that the blurring of lines between publishing and editing is also a factor in the credibility of journalism and in the integrity of journalism. And I'm wondering how that works at the Forward. I mean, here in Baltimore, we have in Trif Aslatsis, I can never pronounce his name, but he is both the publisher and the editor-in-chief. You are not that. Jane Eisner is on the... So how does it work at the Forward? Is there a wall of separation between the two? Should we trust that journalism is there because it's simply newsworthy, or do decisions get made based on funding priorities?
So at the Forward, there is this tension at every publication between the business and the edit. Of course, if you dilute the edit too much and make it too... Any place that has challenging editorial that's going to make somebody angry. It's a little different at the Forward because we are mission-driven, and our mission is to engage with the Jewish people. That's like in our nonprofit mission statement, engaging with the Jewish people through journalism and cultural celebration. Journalism is the essence of what we do, and it's what our funders believe in. They give us their money because they believe in the investigative, challenging work that we do, which unfailingly makes people angry, but the Jewish world needs truth tellers. And so it's absolutely essential that we continue with this incisive and intelligent and really dogged investigative work about the Jewish world. For me to tone that down because it makes people angry, it's different than when Popular Science publishes something about the climate and makes all of makes Exxon mad. It's different than that. The people who really support us most strongly call me up to congratulate me when we do a really tough story. Jane Eisner's article, her editorial about Palestinian nonviolence, will certainly make some people angry. I got a note from the chairman of the board that he thought she should win a Pulitzer. So it is not... I've seen the challenge in many places. It's different at the Forward, which is nice, actually, because it's not a fun tension when you're trying to maintain quality and also not make anybody angry. I don't like making people angry just because I don't like making people angry, but that kind of comes with the territory in publishing. But I'm really proud of the work that we do.
I want to come back to maybe some of those more controversial stories in a bit, but you mentioned in your wonderful speech that you're, of the four guests that we're having, the only one who is representing an organization that does Jewish journalism. And I'm curious to hear maybe a little bit more personally about your journey. We know you started here in Baltimore and at Beth Am, and you told us some of the other places that you had worked along the way, but maybe I can ask you, Rachel, how you feel your own Jewish identity has evolved or developed as a result of your leadership in Jewish journalism? Not just how have you put your imprimatur on the Forward, but how has working at a place like the Forward put its stamp on you?
Well, I know a lot more about Jewish organizations than I did when I started. I have always been interested in the Jewish world. I sort of minored in religion. I majored in English, minored in religion, did a lot of Jewish studies courses in college, and lived in Israel for a year because I was talking to my mom around graduation time, and I wanted to live in a foreign country and speak a foreign language. And I was saying, well, I studied French, maybe Cameroon, or maybe, I don't know, maybe the Caribbean. And she was like, well, oh, this sounds interesting. That sounds great. I'm going to send you a brochure for this program in Israel. And I was like, oh, fine, I'll take a look at it. And then I applied for it, and then I got it, and I was like, well, I guess that's what I'm doing because, you know, the Associated's paying for it, so I guess that's what I'll do my year after college. I mean, I was willing, but what a gracious 21-year-old. I was willing to apply and accept the trip to Israel for a year. because I thought it would be interesting, but I didn't think that, like, on that trip, I met a lot of kids, most of whom had gone to Michigan, who were super into, like, B'nai B'rith and Jewish youth groups, and that wasn't the kind of Judaism we did here. I mean, at Beth Am, we did, intellectual and study, and my dad's very scholarly, and we had all kinds of, books around the house, and whenever we came to services, you'd also bring whatever novel you were reading, as long as it had a Jewish theme. I mean, it was a less, it was less regimented, and that was the way in which Judaism always interested me. So, like, I studied Yiddish in my 20s because I'd lived in Israel so I spoke Hebrew, and I had studied German in high school because my mom had lived in Germany for a year when she was 22. And so Judaism was wrapped up with a lot of intellectual stuff for me, along with that commitment to social justice that I don't even know how literally it was articulated from the Bima. I have no recollection of that, but I know that everyone we knew was on the Board of Education, or the Opera Board, or Operation Sale, or the Planning and Housing Commission, or state government, or city government, or all of the above. And so involvement and commitment and real time and energy towards making your community a better place, that's what being a grown-up was. I mean, that's what I learned here. And it was just in the air. So when the Forward, I was recruited, by the way. A headhunter called me and she said, okay, Rachel, how are you? Listen, hear me out. Hear me out.
Sure she wasn't a matchmaker?
Hear me out. Okay, what do you have, Karen? What do you have for me? And she said, the Forward. And I said, wait, you mean the Jewish Daily Forward? That's still publishing? She said, oh, good, you've heard of it. I said, you're not going to believe it. I studied Yiddish. She was like, oh my God, we have got to get you in there. And when I got in to the offices that are a total schlep from my house, it's like an hour-and-a-half commute each way, every day. So first, by the way, I was like, I'm not going to take this job. The commute's too long. Forget it. There's no way. I went in, and after that first meeting, I had completely stopped thinking about the commute. It was not an issue anymore because I spoke with Sam Norwich, who led the Forward for 20 years before I did, and who is still my very close colleague. We work very closely together, and whenever there's a really tough question, I think, what do I think the answer is? I think of it. Then I call Sam, and we almost always agree. Thank goodness. It would be a real challenge if we didn't. But it makes me feel like, okay, I know what leading the Forward, like what the essence of that means. And when I understood what the Forward was doing, and I, read a whole bunch of articles, because listen, I studied Yiddish. My children went to Hebrew nursery school. I am an active member of my temple, because I'm Reformed now, although I don't like saying temple, but that's what we do in the Reform movement. And I love our temple, and I love the community. I'm in, right? I was not reading the Forward. I mean, do you know what a miss that is? Like, if the Forward was not reaching me before they recruited me to work there, there was something wrong with our outreach. So I knew, okay, I can help this place, and I believe in this place. And since I grew up at Beth Am, I know it's my responsibility. Like, I can't say no. I'm not allowed to say no to this challenge, to a thing that I can actually have an impact on. And it sounded like it would be fun. So I was already committed to my Judaism. I know a lot more acronyms. I know more about how the community works, but there are names dropped around the office all the time that I have no idea who they are. So I'm learning. And it's exciting, and it's interesting, and it feels like such a huge responsibility. So I love my job. It's an amazing job. But my friends say, how are you? I'm like, oh, I'm fine. I'm too busy thinking about, like, who I need to meet with or what we need to do. But anyway, That's a very long answer to how has it affected my Judaism. I guess it sort of affirmed it, but it was always there, and it was always there in a commitment to justice.
And I was surprised actually at how much the theme of justice was a thread through your rationale for taking the job and doing the work. I didn't realize that as part of the mission. I know that, or I believe the language that's used is fearless Jewish journalism. And I'm curious, in particular, if you could think of an example or two that really stand out for you since the 40s, I mean, a little more recently, of things that have happened either under your leadership or just in the last few decades that really stand out as examples of fearless Jewish journalism.
Sure. It's a commitment. One thing we do every year is a salary survey. And a salary survey is a sort of normal journalistic instrument to study a sector and understand what's happening in that world, whether it's energy companies, I don't know why I keep mentioning them, but energy companies, or the Jewish philanthropic world. And we take publicly available information, but it's publicly available in that it's published to annual reports, and we bring it together and we publish the salaries of all of the top executives at Jewish nonprofits. Not all of them, a lot. All of the people who could be very helpful to the Forward, if they wanted to be. And we go and we publish how much money they make. And it's sort of like, you can't really complain about it, but nobody likes it. It's in an effort to showcase, and it does unfailingly showcase, that the Jewish philanthropic world is led by men, and all of the largest organizations, except for one, are led by men, and they all make a lot more money than the women. And by the way, all the people who work for them are women. So somehow, in the Jewish philanthropic world, there are, it is demonstrated, I'm not going to say it is the case, but what the situation would illustrate is somehow none of these women who work for these men are qualified to take over that philanthropic organization when they leave. It's pathetic. And so we showcase that. And I know that the next time I go to a conference after we publish this thing, the Forward is not going to get the sort of warm support that we need. We need that. We need the support of the Jewish world, and it's a tough decision every year to publish something that's going to make it harder for us to get the support of the Jewish world. That's a sort of internal challenge. Physically, when we sent a reporter to Iran, we were very concerned about his health and safety, but we knew that it was an opportunity that was incredible and that was rare and that would allow us to report through a Jewish lens on Iran in a way that the Times is not going to. I mean, they're wonderful, but that's not their mandate. And then when it comes to Israel, we publish a lot about Israel, and we publish many more Palestinian voices than most other Jewish publications. We feel that it is our responsibility to show what the Palestinian experience under Israeli rule is like. It can be challenging when it comes to making decisions about speech that edges on what might be moving into when does it cease being criticism of Israel and when does it start being anti-Semitism. It is a very difficult call. It's not my call, as I'm not the editor-in-chief, but we work very closely together. But bearing the responsibility of these people that Israel is responsible for and stuck with. The issue would be wonderful if it would just, in some peaceful way, disappear, but it's not going to. And so it is our responsibility to make sure that the Jewish world can't just forget about it, because it ain't going away. And that is tough, and it's a difficult decision to make, and sometimes you run things that I don't love, but we are always striving to bring all legitimate points of view of the subject to our readership so that they know what's happening. One more thing that we cover, and that's painful to cover, is some millennial apathy towards Israel. A lot of millennials, I don't know about a majority, but many don't really care about Israel. It's just not relevant to them. It's not something they think about. It's not their bag. They're not interested. They're interested in being Jewish, they're interested in Judaism, they're interested in the culture, they may or may not be interested in the religion. Israel, it's just not. So that's something we're also trying to cover, and it's part of our active campaign to reach, we're supposed to engage with the Jewish people. The Jewish people start from 0 and up to however old, and we're trying to engage with all of them and have them see their voices in our pages so they know that there's a place for them there. And making these judgment calls about running points of view that a lot of people aren't going to like is tough. So, well, we have to. That's our job.
I want to stay with this, or come back to the salary survey for a moment, because I think this is very interesting. It sounds like, while there are many differences between a Jewish media outlet and a synagogue or other Jewish nonprofits, we all sort of share that same challenge of to what extent do we air our dirty laundry? And this seems to come up a lot in Jewish leadership. Is it okay to talk publicly? And I think increasingly in the world that we live in, social media, the internet, we recognize that trying to keep things a secret really doesn't go all that well for us in the long run, and actually being able to talk about things publicly may bring some advantages as well. I'd like to think that a news organization would already come to that just from a values perspective anyway. So to that end, I actually had looked at that salary survey, and I noticed also what you noticed about the number of men on it. For what it's worth, our own Mark Terrell of The Associated is number 6 on that list. I noticed that it was all men until number 29. The first woman then shows up as Naomi Adler of the Philadelphia Federation, and that her salary is half of what the top male CEO makes on that list. For what it's worth, I did notice that you clocked in at number 48.
That's right. I get to be on there. That's another.
You did make the list.
Love that. But,
So I just want to kind of come to this, the moment we're in of Me Too, and now Time's Up, this new movement that's starting to try to advocate for women beyond the media and Hollywood and in places where they're experiencing sexual harassment, they're experiencing discrimination in terms of salaries, they're experiencing sometimes a lot worse in terms of physical assault. Staying with the media for a moment, from Matt Lauer to Charlie Rose and beyond, it does seem like the news media has seen disproportionate representation in the story. And, of the 4 guests that have been here, you talked about how you're sui generis in being the only one representing a Jewish news organization, but you're also the only woman of the 4. And so I'm wondering if you might be willing to shed some light from your perspective on this historic moment. What does it mean, and what does it mean for journalism?
Well, it is a historic moment. One of the things we're very proud of at The Forward is that we are totally women-run. I'm the CEO and publisher. Our editor-in-chief is a woman, Jane Eisner, and Rachel Schechter is the Yiddish editor, and all 3 of us were hired by a man, Sam Norwich, who had the vision to hire the people he thought were most qualified, and we're all women. And We don't think that makes us immune to having sexual harassment at our organization, but we are very insistent on reading the sexual harassment policy like quarterly and having everybody sign it and making like, yes, I did read this. I think one of the reasons that you're seeing overrepresentation in the media is that that's what the stories are closest to. You know, when there's dirty laundry, you see it at your own organization, and they knew these stories already, and they were just ready to report them, whereas they might not know what's going on at T. Rowe Price or Caterpillar or what. You know, like they don't work there. They work where they work. So there is an overrepresentation, but I would never imagine that it's because media is some special case.
Something endemic to media.
It's endemic to the world we live in. Any woman who works in any other industry, I'm sure, has. Do you know how many nods I'm seeing in the audience right now from women who work? So yeah, it's the case everywhere. You know, the implications more broadly, I don't know. I mean, it seems like we're certainly not done with this moment. I'm curious about what will happen in the other Jewish institutions that we cover. It's always been a topic, by the way, that we cover pretty insistently. One of the stories we covered, and we have to make these decisions all the time. It's just part of being a media organization. It's exactly analogous to being, you know, like at a synagogue and wondering what you can share. It's our job to share. You just, you know, growing up, hearing phrases like the shanda for the goyim is like, oh, that's my job now, is to showcase all of our shandas for everybody. So there's a really good organization in New York City called Footsteps that helps Hasidic young people, if they choose to leave the Hasidic community, to enter mainstream life. And there was a guy there who was one of the people who was being helped, who was preying on women in this organization, and women who were particularly vulnerable because they grew up where the men were in charge, and their understanding about what they might be conveying with what they were wearing, was I wearing the wrong thing, was just, you know, these women were in a very, very vulnerable, and they were being taken advantage of. And we told that story, and of course, felt unhappy that we had to tell that story because Footsteps does a lot of great work, and it's not good for them. But on the other hand, having this guy in their ranks wasn't good for them either. So I don't even know what you call that emotion of knowing you're doing the right thing, but also feeling a little queasy about it is called, but that's what it is.
Yeah, I think it's called Melechet Kodesh, which is holy work.
Yes,
which
right.
is not always easy.
I'm just doing holy work, okay?
Right. Well, it's, you know, it is hard. I could go on and ask you more questions, but I want to make sure there's time for others to ask. And I can't see any of you right now anyway, but I see a hand back there, and I think Ted has a microphone, so you could pass it over. There's Brian Sullum. Hi, Brian. And just everybody, when you get the mic, please hold it close to your mouth. Otherwise, you'll have 5 people tell you that because they can't hear you.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question that follows up on your last conversation. Doing holy work. I was a reporter at The Sun and did most of the reporting on the Old Court Savings and Loan scandal, which was led by a Jew. I had a rabbi come into my house and tell me this was the wrong thing to be doing because it put the Jewish people in a bad light. And my response was, I wouldn't care if Jeffrey Levitt were Episcopalian, Buddhist, or Hindu. He was a crook. So how do you deal with that in a period when there's heightened anti-Semitism?
We get that a lot. We get criticism for showing Jews in a bad light. We get criticism for you have a Jew did something wrong story. The guy did something wrong. How do we deal with it? the response is always the same. We are a journalistic institution. Our job is to tell the truth about the Jewish world. There is nobody else who does it like we do. If we don't do it, how will you know what's going on in the Jewish world? Sure, today it's about, you're not happy because it's about an institution you care about, but tomorrow it's going to be about something else that really matters, and you're going to be reading us tomorrow so that you know what's happening in the world. If you start censoring the news, then you're just in a crazy Kafkaesque landscape. It's un-American. So, given that journalism is a pillar of democracy, that's the truth that we adhere to when we have these moments of discomfort, when our community or members of our community are unhappy with us. Again, our board is totally committed to investigative Jewish journalism. And so, I have people at the office who sympathize with me. I have, a board of directors I can talk to. That's something where you're like, unlike anti-Semitism where people send you horrible threats, the uncomfortableness of journalism, that comes with the territory. You just got to live with it, as you know.
Great.
David,
yes, David.
The mic, so, David Simon talked about journalism school just in passing. Could you say a little bit about how you vet a story, how you make that decision, and what you look for in accepting the truth, the veracity of a story?
Sure. Again, I'm not the editor-in-chief, but I will tell you that we have a lot of conversations about what is credible. When a story is sourced, we try to have more than one source. We try to find corroborating information. We try to share with the readers where the information came from. If there's a story about an institution, we always reach out to that institution and try to get their response. We did a story about the JNF recently, about the blue and white boxes that you put money into, and where it goes, and the money goes somewhere different now than it used to. It still goes to Israel, and actually it goes to other worthy places, but it doesn't go where people think it goes, usually. And we asked the JNF to respond, and they didn't. They probably should have, because there was nothing wrong with what they were doing, but they didn't want to engage. So we try to reach out to the institutions and get their response. Sometimes they won't respond. Let's see, for the Footsteps story, for example, that was a really tricky story because it involved allegations, and it involved allegations against somebody who was named. And so we reached out multiple times to multiple people. We tried to get multiple people to speak on the record, and if not on the record, to at least corroborate off the record, so that, when you perform journalism, you have a responsibility to make sure you're getting the story as right as you possibly can. So we pay very close attention to the sources of information.
David, and maybe we'll come over to Larry next. Yeah, go ahead.
So with the digital-first strategy, how does long-form investigative journalism fit in? Things like the agri-processor's story, which was, very, very long.
Right. It fits in very well. Sometimes long stories bring in readers for years in a way that a short 2-paragraph story won't. Digital first doesn't mean just short bits. We are doing more aggregation. We're doing more, that means like we're doing more, hey, did you hear about such and such that so-and-so reported? That's an aggregated story. That's not us reporting it. But we also have longer pieces that are just as important. The quality of what we do is what people come to us for. So we think it's really important.
Yeah, that's something I remember David Simon saying when he was here, was talking about how, now in his world of entertainment, he can put out a television show that may tell a story that's similar to a story he would have told as a journalist, but it's a very limited slice, and he was making the claim that long-form journalism, real hard, researched, beat journalism is still where it's at, and I certainly have been glad to see pieces like that when they appear in the Forward and other places that remind us that there's depth and nuance to every story, and I'm glad to see. You always hear these cautionary tales. Television is going to mean the end of books, or the internet is going to mean the end of journalism, and I think we're finding that people want to learn, and we just need to find ways to reach them. I think we have time for a few more questions. Larry, yes.
For many years, support of Israel and support of what most of us would consider to be Jewish values ran, if not perfectly aligned, generally speaking, on the same path. But over the years, there's been a divergence in those paths, and it's now come to a head in many ways with this president and this administration. And when you have a president who fails to condemn anti-Semitism, fascism, and yet he has many Jewish supporters who also fail to condemn and continue to support. And kudos to to leaders like Rabbi Berg, who didn't support the AIPAC conference because President Trump was there. But I'm curious to hear your opinion about how the Jewish media and media in general covers people, and I won't get into a lot of names, but Sheldon Adelson is one, for example, who is a significant financial supporter and remained quiet, as have many other big financiers. Do they get a pass because they are ardent supporters of Israel, if not Jewish values, or at least the Jewish values that many people in here would agree with?
Do they get a pass? Well, not at the Forward. One of the challenges for readers of Jewish journalism, or any journalism, is to consider the source. You always have to consider the source, no matter what you're reading or looking at. There are some Jewish outlets that are more conservative than the Forward. There are some that, and by the way, this is the stuff I'm learning on the job. I didn't know about any of these places before I worked at the Forward, but there's the LA Jewish Journal. They just fired a bunch of reporters and have a new publisher who's much more conservative than their old publisher. And so now, if you're a close reader of the Jewish journalism world, you will know, oh, the LA Jewish Journal, they're pretty conservative. I have to keep that in mind when I read them. The Forward is left of center, but to the right of the left. That's our editorial stand, but we have opinion pages where we run opinion from across the spectrum, from people who might be supporters of Adelson to those who can't stand him. Do these guys get a pass? It really depends on who's talking. I'm sure that some do give them a pass.
Actually, can I just ask a follow-up question to that
Sure.
in terms of the Elie Wiesel story? Can you say anything about that?
The Elie Wiesel story.
Yeah. Wasn't there a story about Elie Wiesel that was published online and then was retracted?
Yes, and that actually relates to the story about sourcing. In the midst, one thing that can happen when you publish digitally, and you are in a rush to publish because you want to publish a lot of stuff, which I think might have been the underpinnings of your question about long-form journalism, and when you hire a lot of young people to come and learn at the Forward, is that sometimes people make mistakes. And so there was a story, an allegation against Elie Wiesel that was 30 years old, and it wasn't possible to verify in any way, but it was like at this really hot moment of like just story after story about person after person coming out, and one of our youngest and least experienced writers published the story, and then when his editor saw it, we said, it's not well sourced enough, we have to take it down. I mean, you never wanted that to happen. You don't want to publish something that you have to retract, but you don't want to leave something up that isn't responsibly reported. So we're always grappling with these elements of speed to publish, training young people, telling the story responsibly, telling the story quickly, and in that case, we got it wrong, so we retracted it.
Let's take 2 more questions.
Sorry, I keep wiggling around. I'm trying to avoid.
Lynn Kabeloff.
The menorah is blocking the sun for me.
I have a very interesting story to say. I mean, I come from a really Jewish, I have a really Jewish background, but I was not familiar with the Forward, but I'm in the publishing business also, and we're trying to put basically our print edition online, and there are some stories that come up, like you're talking about, you had to pull Wiesel down. How do you handle that? Are you putting your whole print edition online as well as?
Yes.
as
Everything
the-
in print goes online.
And
Some-
are you trying to do a 24-hour news posting also?
I mean, 24-hour, we try to have some people start early and some people stay up late, but that's not the essence of what we do. I mean, the essence of what we do is insightful, serious, and celebratory Jewish journalism, and mostly people are not coming to us for breaking news. We do break news sometimes, but that's not the greatest service that we offer. It's a piece of the news that we offer. So we're more concerned with getting really strong, great stories than we are with making sure that somebody's up at 3 o'clock in the morning to constantly be pushing out information. We do have a newsletter that goes out first thing in the morning, about 6:30 or 7 a.m.
Well, how do you check, as you say, to try to find the sources are correct? Because, I mean, we've won many awards for excellence in reporting, but it's very hard when you have 24-hour news postings.
Right. When we make a mistake or when we do something that we think could be better, we try to make it a learning experience always. We try to get the staff together and talk about what happened and why we would do it differently and how to not do it that way next time. But now I feel like we're getting into shop talk about journalism, which I love to do, but I'm not sure. We could continue after if you like.
Okay. All right. One final question?
One question?
Yep, I see Stuart Stamen has a hand up. Over there.
Took me a while to get there.
How's the relationship between your news organization and the Orthodox, the conservative, the Reform, and the Reconstruction?
That's a very short and simple question.
Simple. Yes or no is fine.
There definitely is. I will say, I hear among conservative rabbis that there's a reputation that the Forward has that's sort of in for the conservative movement in particular, and I'm wondering if that's unique. Like, do all of the movements feel that way? The stuff, that, and certain writers over the years that people cause, the Forward, they're always lambasted. They love to pick on the conservative. I mean, what is the relationship with the different movement? Is that true? Do you have it in for the conservative?
Every movement thinks that we have it in for them. Every movement. And Jane, our editor-in-chief, is an ardent conservative, religiously, not politically. She does Torah studies. She goes to shul on Saturday. She's a conservative. I met the head of the Reconstructionist movement who said, Jane has it in for me, because of that thing about intermarriage and where I said blah, blah, blah. And so everybody thinks that we have it in for them because we publish commentary. If we said, hey, everything is great and every movement is great and every movement is right, there's no business there. And it's also not, there's no study, there's nothing to talk about. It's not interesting. So what is our relationship with the movements? We try to maintain good, strong, ongoing and human relationships with every movement so that we can understand them better, and so that when they make changes or when they update things or when they're thinking about stuff or stuff happens, we can talk to them and get the best, most insightful, truest story we possibly can. So we see them at benefits, we see them at conferences, we see them at, gatherings and missions, and we're always trying to deepen those connections. one interesting thing that we see, just to give a little color to this answer, is we can see where our readership is by geographic region. And in New York, we can get it down to neighborhood. And we know that in the Hasidic neighborhoods, our readership is actually pretty strong. And the story is that it's the men who are reading it not on the phone that their Rebbe looks at, but on their other phone, because the forward's not kosher, but they really want to read it.
I think that's a good place to end. And I wanna say what a delight this has been, Rachel. Thank you so much for making the time to be here. I have just a small token of our appreciation. This is 2 tickets to go see The Post when it comes out this week in New York, New Jersey. But if you saw it, or if you have other plans, you can use it for something else. But new Tom Hanks, Meryl Streep movie, Steven Spielberg directed, about investigative journalism, not in this era, but in a Kafkaesque way, maybe a similar kind of era. It's been really a delight to have you with us. Thank you very much. Thanks to our continuing education folks for their support of this ongoing series. Our next one is going to be the first Shabbat in March with none other than Robert Blau of Bloomberg News. Bob's here today, and I look forward to being able to tie together some of what we've learned in the first 3 conversations and think about the future, perhaps, of journalism in America. Shabbat Shalom, everybody, and thanks once again to Rachel.
Thank you very much.